In the heart of the city, there is a luxury restaurant known for its impeccable service and fine dining. The restaurant has earned a reputation for attracting high-profile guests, from business tycoons to famous celebrities. The interior is elegant, with sparkling chandeliers, polished floors, and private booths that offer privacy and comfort. It is a place where only the most exclusive clientele come to dine, and everything is done with precision. The restaurant has a strict dress code. All waitstaff must wear black suits and white shirts, polished shoes, and maintain a neat appearance at all times. The menu features expensive dishes, with prices that reflect the quality and reputation of the restaurant. For most customers, a meal here is a special occasion, a night to remember, but for the staff, it's just another day of hard work and dedication. James, a young waiter in his mid-20s, has been working at this restaurant for 2 years. He is known for his professionalism and attentiveness. His uniform is always spotless, and his demeanor is calm and polite. James takes pride in his job. He enjoys serving people, ensuring they have a memorable experience, and always treating every guest with respect, no matter their background. He knows the importance of the restaurant's reputation and does everything he can to contribute to it. Despite his efforts, not everything is as smooth as it seems. While most of the staff are friendly, there are a few who treat James differently. He often finds himself assigned to the harder sections of the restaurant, dealing with difficult customers or working longer hours. He's overlooked when it comes to promotions, and his tips are often smaller than those of his colleagues. The others sometimes joke about his quiet nature and assume he's content with his role, not realizing how much he desires to move up in the restaurant's ranks. James doesn't complain, though. He keeps his head down, does his job to the best of his ability, and focuses on doing what's right. He believes that if he works hard enough, his efforts will eventually be recognized. On a busy evening, a wealthy couple walks into the restaurant. They are regulars, known by the staff for their demanding attitudes. The husband, Mr. Thompson, is a middle-aged man with a sharp suit and an even sharper tongue. He's known for his rudeness and entitlement. He rarely speaks with the staff in a kind way and often makes unreasonable demands. His wife, on the other hand, seems uncomfortable with his behavior, but she rarely speaks up. She follows his lead, avoiding eye contact with the staff as she quietly observes the tension he creates. James approaches the table with a polite smile, his steps measured and calm. He greets Mr. and Mrs. Thompson in his usual professional manner, offering a friendly, "Good evening. Welcome to our restaurant." At first, Mr. Thompson doesn't even look up. His eyes are fixed on the menu in front of him, his expression cold and uninterested. Mrs. Thompson glances up briefly, but her gaze quickly returns to the menu as well, avoiding any interaction with James. James remains patient, standing beside the table, waiting for Mr. Thompson to acknowledge him. After a moment of silence, James speaks again, asking, "Can I take your order, sir?" Mr. Thompson sighs loudly, as though the mere act of speaking to James has exhausted him. He leans back in his chair, glancing at James with disdain. "Service is getting worse here," he mutters, almost to himself. "Unqualified staff everywhere. It's a shame." James, his face betraying no emotion, nods politely. "I'm sorry you feel that way, sir. If there's anything I can do to make your experience better, please let me know." Mr. Thompson waves his hand dismissively, clearly unimpressed. He starts to rattle off his order, his tone condescending, as though he's doing James a favor by even speaking to him. "I'll have the steak, medium rare, and I want a side of mashed potatoes, not that bland stuff you usually serve. Can't stand the way your chef cooks it." As James writes the order down on his pad, he doesn't react. He's learned to keep his composure over time, no matter how difficult the guests are. But Mr. Thompson isn't finished. He looks up, a smirk forming on his lips, and asks, "Are you even trained for this, or did they just hire anyone off the street to fill in?" James pauses for a moment, the words hitting harder than they should. But he doesn't show it. He looks Mr. Thompson in the eye and replies calmly, "Yes, sir, I'm fully trained." His voice is steady, without a hint of anger, though inside he can feel his frustration building. Mr. Thompson chuckles, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "People like you should stick to fast food jobs," he says loudly, making sure the entire dining room can hear. The room falls silent. For a moment, no one speaks. The other guests at nearby tables glance over, some with wide eyes, others with quiet discomfort. But no one says anything. They remain silent, unsure of how to react, as if this is just a normal occurrence. James stands there, the weight of Mr. Thompson's words heavy in the air. He can feel his face flush with embarrassment, but he refuses to let it show. He takes a deep breath, his shoulders straightening. He keeps his voice calm and respectful, replying, "I'm sorry you feel that way, sir. If there's anything else I can do to make your meal more enjoyable, please let me know." But Mr. Thompson isn't finished. He continues mocking James, making cruel comments about his intelligence and questioning his ability to serve. "I bet you don't even know how to pair the wine with this," he sneers. "How do they let people like you handle customers?" James can feel his hands trembling, but he forces himself to remain composed. The situation is getting worse, but he knows that responding with anger or frustration would only make things worse. He nods, saying, "I'll get your order right away, sir." Without waiting for a response, he turns and walks away, his heart racing. As he moves toward the kitchen, he struggles to hold back his frustration. The laughter of the guests and the words of Mr. Thompson still echo in his mind. The sting of humiliation is sharp, but James knows he can't let it show. Not here, not now. The door to the restaurant opens, and a wave of excitement ripples through the room. A well-known figure has just entered. It's Michael Carter, an award-winning actor famous not only for his remarkable talent, but also for his philanthropy. His reputation extends beyond the screen, with countless charitable efforts that have made him beloved in the public eye. As he walks in, the atmosphere shifts slightly. Guests at nearby tables glance over, their whispers of recognition quickly spreading. Some lean forward, eager to catch a glimpse of the celebrity, while others take out their phones, trying to snap a photo discreetly. Michael's presence fills the space, though he moves through the restaurant with the calm, collected air of someone who is used to being the center of attention. He greets the maitre d' warmly, who leads him to a table near the window. The table is quiet, away from the rest of the crowd, but still within view of the main dining area. Michael takes a seat and places his jacket on the back of the chair. He glances around the room, casually surveying the diners, his gaze eventually landing on James, who is standing near the kitchen, his posture stiff. James looks shaken. The events from moments earlier with Mr. Thompson are still weighing heavily on him. His usual calm demeanor has faltered, and the discomfort is clear in his body language. He's trying to maintain his professionalism, but it's hard with the sting of humiliation still fresh. Michael notices this, his eyes narrowing slightly. He sees the young waiter standing alone, his shoulders slumped as if the world is weighing him down. Something about the situation catches his attention, and he's instinctively drawn to it. James takes a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. He knows he can't let the situation affect him. He has a job to do. He forces a smile onto his face and walks toward Michael's table, determined to keep it together. "Good evening, sir. My name is James, and I'll be your server tonight," he says, his voice polite and professional, despite the turmoil inside. Michael looks up, his eyes meeting James's with a warmth that immediately puts him at ease. "Thank you, James," Michael replies with a genuine smile. His tone is kind, not rushed, and he gives James his full attention. "I'll have the salmon tonight, with the seasonal vegetables, and a glass of your best white wine, please." James nods, making a note of the order on his pad. "I'll get that for you right away, sir. Thank you for choosing our restaurant." He says it with sincerity, and Michael responds with a nod of appreciation, maintaining eye contact. As James walks away, trying to focus on his task, he hears a familiar voice cutting through the air. It's Mr. Thompson again, his words rising above the hum of conversation. "Standards are really dropping here," Mr. Thompson says loudly, his tone laced with mockery. "I mean, look at this. The waiter can barely keep his hands steady, and the wine list is a joke." His wife looks uncomfortable but says nothing, merely glancing around the room with an awkward frown. Michael's head turns slightly, his attention now on the conversation unfolding at Mr. Thompson's table. He's still watching, his expression tightening as he listens. James is walking further away now, but the hurtful words reach him, and he can feel the weight of them press down on his chest. It's as though everything Mr. Thompson has said and done is being aimed directly at him. But Michael is watching James as he walks. He notices how James doesn't flinch, doesn't show any sign of giving in to the insults. James remains composed, his face neutral, even though the situation is clearly affecting him. The fact that James is continuing to do his job with dignity despite the cruelty doesn't go unnoticed by Michael. Michael's expression changes. The kindness in his eyes turns to something more resolute, almost as if a decision has been made. He doesn't know the full story, but he knows what he's witnessing isn't right. He feels a wave of empathy for James and can't ignore the injustice happening in front of him. He sits back in his chair, his jaw clenched. He watches as James continues on with his duties, keeping his head down, determined not to let the public humiliation affect him. But Michael can't simply stay silent. He decides in that moment that he will step in. This isn't a situation where silence is the answer. He knows he has the power to make a difference, and he will not stand by while someone is being treated so unfairly. Michael sits up straighter in his chair, his eyes never leaving Mr. Thompson's table. He watches the man for a moment longer, feeling the weight of his decision. This isn't a small matter, and Michael knows it's time to act. Without hesitation, he raises his hand, catching the eye of Mr. Reynolds, the restaurant manager. Mr. Reynolds, who has been monitoring the room from a distance, makes his way toward Michael's table. He approaches cautiously, aware that the celebrity's presence alone might mean something significant. "Yes, Mr. Carter, how can I help?" Mr. Reynolds asks, his tone respectful but unsure of what's coming. Michael doesn't waste time with pleasantries. His voice is firm but calm as he addresses the manager. "I've been watching the situation at that table," he says, gesturing toward Mr. Thompson and his wife. "Is this kind of behavior acceptable in your restaurant?" Mr. Reynolds hesitates for a moment, clearly caught off guard by the question. His eyes flicker toward Mr. Thompson's table and then back to Michael, his mind racing for an appropriate response. "Well, sir, we try to maintain a level of professionalism here, of course," Mr. Reynolds begins, his voice faltering. "But sometimes people's behavior is out of our control." Michael's gaze sharpens. "Out of your control? It's your restaurant. You can control what happens in this room. This is about respect. And right now, someone is disrespecting your staff. That's not just a problem for him. It's a problem for your whole establishment." Mr. Reynolds opens his mouth to respond, but Michael holds up a hand to stop him. Instead, he looks toward James, who is standing nearby, trying his best to remain inconspicuous. "James," Michael calls gently, his voice filled with warmth. "Could you come over here for a moment?" James, still shaken but doing his best to keep his composure, walks over to Michael's table. He stands awkwardly, unsure of what's happening, his eyes flicking between Michael and Mr. Reynolds. Michael smiles reassuringly at James, then turns his attention back to the young waiter. "James," he asks, "how long have you been working here, and do you enjoy your job?" James hesitates for a moment, caught off guard by the unexpected attention. He's never been asked these questions by a guest before, let alone someone as well known as Michael Carter. "I've been here for 2 years, sir," he says quietly. "And, yes, I enjoy my job. I try to do my best." Michael nods, his gaze softening as he listens. But even as James speaks, Michael can sense the unspoken weight on his shoulders. The strain of dealing with rude customers, the frustration of being treated unfairly, all hidden behind the calm exterior of a professional waiter. Mr. Thompson, still unaware of what's unfolding, watches the conversation with growing curiosity. He doesn't realize that things are about to take a sharp turn. Michael turns slowly toward him, his expression now serious. The mood in the room shifts. tension rising as everyone begins to sense what's coming next. "Mr. Thompson," Michael says, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the dining room. "Do you always insult people who serve you?" The question hangs in the air, and the room falls silent. It's as though time itself pauses for a moment. The entire restaurant seems to hold its breath, waiting for Mr. Thompson's reaction. Mr. Thompson's face goes pale for a split second before he forces a chuckle, trying to downplay the situation. "What? Insult? No, no. It's just some friendly banter," he says with a nervous laugh, glancing around the room in an attempt to lighten the mood. But Michael doesn't let him off the hook. His voice remains calm but firm, unwavering. "No, Mr. Thompson. What you're doing is not friendly banter. It's disrespectful. And respect isn't something you get because you're paying for an expensive meal. It's earned by how we treat others, no matter who they are or what they do." There's another long pause. Mr. Thompson's face reddens, the realization of his behavior finally dawning on him. He shifts uncomfortably in his seat, squirming as if trying to escape the situation. But there's nowhere to hide. His wife, who has been silent through all of this, looks down at her plate, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She doesn't speak up, but the discomfort is evident in her posture. Around the room, other diners begin to murmur in agreement with Michael's words. Some nod, their eyes now fixed on Mr. Thompson, as if silently acknowledging the truth of what has just been said. The power dynamic has shifted. The man who once felt entitled to belittle others now finds himself the subject of scrutiny. James stands frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He's shocked. He never expected anyone to stand up for him, especially not someone like Michael Carter. He had always thought that moments like this would pass unnoticed, but here, in front of the entire room, someone has finally spoken out against the cruelty he's been subjected to. For the first time that night, James feels a wave of relief wash over him, though it's still hard to believe what's happening. Mr. Thompson, still unable to fully process the situation, says nothing more. The silence stretches on, uncomfortable and thick. Everyone is waiting to see how this will end. But Michael's words have already had their impact, and the atmosphere in the room has completely changed. Mr. Thompson, clearly uncomfortable and desperate to regain some control of the situation, tries to defend himself. He shifts in his chair, attempting to laugh off the tension. "It was just a joke, all right?" he says loudly, his voice edged with irritation. "I wasn't being serious. You know, just some humor. Lighten up, everyone." But the room remains silent, the weight of Michael's words still hanging in the air. No one seems to be buying his defense. Michael calmly responds, his tone measured and deliberate. "If it was a joke, Mr. Thompson, why isn't anyone laughing?" The question lingers in the room, echoing in the minds of every person who has been witness to the scene. The atmosphere is thick with discomfort, and the laughter that Mr. Thompson expected never comes. His attempt to brush off the situation only makes it worse. The once bustling energy of the restaurant now feels suffocating, with every eye on him, waiting for him to accept responsibility. The reality of the situation starts to sink in for Mr. Thompson. The truth is clear. This wasn't a harmless joke. It was a direct insult, aimed at someone who didn't deserve it. And as he looks around the room, he begins to see the effect of his words. His sense of entitlement falters, and he shifts uncomfortably in his seat, the smugness from earlier replaced by frustration. Mr. Reynolds, the manager, who has been watching from a distance, finally steps forward. He knows this moment can't go unaddressed. He clears his throat, drawing attention to himself. "Mr. Thompson," he begins, his voice firm but calm. "This kind of behavior towards staff is not acceptable in this restaurant. We pride ourselves on respect, both from our guests and our team." Mr. Thompson's eyes narrow, and his face flushes with anger. He's not used to being spoken to this way, especially not in front of others. He opens his mouth, ready to argue, but the words seem to die in his throat. He's out of excuses. "Do you understand?" Mr. Reynolds presses, his gaze unwavering. Mr. Thompson's jaw clenches, but he doesn't argue further. He knows it would only make things worse. The silence stretches, thick and uncomfortable, as he looks around the room, avoiding eye contact with the other diners. The weight of the moment presses on him, and it becomes clear that no one is on his side. Around the room, customers begin to murmur in quiet agreement with Michael's and Mr. Reynolds' words. A sense of unity grows among the other guests. Some nod, exchanging glances, while others shift in their seats, clearly relieved that the situation has been addressed. The room, once tense and divided, now feels different. The respect that had been missing has slowly started to return. James, standing nearby, watches everything unfold. For the first time that night, he feels a shift within himself. The anger and humiliation he had been carrying are replaced by a quiet pride. He stands taller, his shoulders no longer hunched with the weight of the insults. He feels supported, not just by Michael, but by the collective stance of everyone in the room. He's no longer alone in this fight. As Michael finishes his meal, he glances at James. His expression softens, and he gives the young waiter a reassuring nod, acknowledging the strength he's shown. It's a small gesture, but it means more than words could say. James gives a subtle nod in return, a silent thank you. Michael doesn't need to say anything more. Mr. Thompson and his wife finish their dinner quickly. The tension between them is palpable. They don't say a word to anyone else as they stand up to leave. Mr. Thompson's face is flushed, his pride bruised, and he can't get out of the restaurant fast enough. His wife follows him silently, her face flushed with embarrassment. Neither of them makes eye contact with anyone as they leave, the door closing behind them with a sense of finality. As they exit, the room seems to exhale, the weight lifting as the atmosphere returns to its usual calm. James returns to his duties, but something has changed. The confidence that he had lost over the course of the evening slowly begins to return. With each step he takes, he feels stronger, more in control. He's no longer just a waiter. He's someone who deserves respect. The evening continues, but the sense of unity and respect that has filled the room remains. James moves through the restaurant, his posture straighter, his steps more assured. And for the first time, he feels like he truly belongs in this space. As the last course of Michael's meal is cleared away, he signals for James to come over once more. This time, there's a warmth in his smile that James hadn't expected. The buzz of the restaurant fades into the background as Michael looks up at him, his expression kind and open. "James, could you come here for a moment?" Michael says, his voice gentle but firm. James, still processing the events of the evening, walks over slowly, unsure of what to expect. His hands are still a bit shaky, but he's doing his best to remain composed. Michael gestures for him to sit down. "Thank you for your professionalism tonight," Michael says sincerely, his tone calm but filled with admiration. "It's not easy to remain composed when people treat you the way you've been treated. But you did. That says a lot about your character." James listens intently, grateful but unsure how to respond. The praise is unexpected, and it feels different from the hollow compliments he's heard from others. This feels real. Michael leans forward slightly, his voice softening as he speaks from experience. "I know what it's like to be underestimated. When I was starting out in my career, I dealt with a lot of disrespect too. People would doubt my abilities, say things that were hurtful, or dismiss me because of where I came from. But none of that defines who you are, James. It's how you carry yourself, how you respond to others, and how you stay true to your worth, no matter what people say." James nods, absorbing every word. It's rare that anyone takes the time to acknowledge his struggle, let alone offer such meaningful advice. For the first time tonight, he feels the weight of the humiliation begin to lift, replaced by something else, a quiet sense of pride. Michael continues, his voice now filled with conviction. "Remember, people's words don't define you. Only you define your worth." James feels a lump form in his throat. The kindness in Michael's words is something he never expected. It's the kind of encouragement he's always longed for but never thought he'd receive. Michael reaches for his wallet, pulling out a generous tip and placing it on the table along with a small note. He looks up at James one last time. "Keep your head up, James. You're going places," he says with a reassuring smile. James smiles back, a genuine smile that reaches his eyes for the first time that evening. He picks up the check, his heart lighter than it's been all night. For the first time, he feels truly seen and respected. The events of the evening, the insults, the tension, they all seem a little smaller now. He heads back to the kitchen, the note still clutched in his hand, knowing that this moment will stay with him long after the night is over.